What happens when a mother's volunteer work at her daughter's school dance turns into a criminal investigation? A 43-year-old woman is now facing serious charges after DNA evidence revealed something nobody expected. The baby she gave birth to in January? Police say the father is a middle school student, the same boy who attended that dance with her daughter. This isn't fiction. This is real, and the evidence is staggering. Welcome to this investigative report. What you're about to hear involves DNA analysis, criminal charges, and a situation so shocking that it raises questions about trust, protection, and how far manipulation can go. Stay with me because the details only get more unbelievable as we go deeper. According to court documents, shortly after that May 2023 dance, the student moved away from the Washington area. His family relocated. That should have been the end of any connection between Robin and this young boy. But it wasn't. Fast forward to April 2024. The student returned to Washington for what documents describe as a brief visit to see a friend. That friend, investigators would later discover, was Robin. Then in June 2024 he came back again. Another visit. Another stay with this so-called friend. By August 2024, something even more unusual happened. The student didn't just visit this time. He moved back to Washington permanently. And where did he live? With Robin's family. Think about that timeline for a moment. A middle school boy who attended a dance with Robin's daughter in May 2023 was now living in Robin's home by August 2024. How does that happen? What conversations took place? What arrangements were made? Those questions would become critical as the investigation unfolded. On a winter day in January 2025, Robin gave birth to a baby boy. Birth certificates are standard documentation, filed with the county, listing basic information about the newborn and the parents. Detective Hen obtained Robin's baby's birth certificate on February 13, 2025. The document listed the baby's name, but one section stood out immediately. The father's information was completely blank. No name. No details. Nothing. However, there was something interesting about the baby's name. The child's middle and last names matched those of the student, the same middle school boy who had moved in with Robin months earlier. When detectives questioned Robin about the baby's father, she provided an explanation. She claimed the father was a man named Brian, someone she described as being in his 20s. According to Robin, she hadn't seen Brian since discovering she was pregnant, and he played no role in the baby's life. But investigators weren't convinced. Something didn't add up. Here's where the situation takes another turn. Reports began circulating, first on social media, then more widely, that Robin had participated in a maternity photo session. These weren't just casual snapshots. These were professional-style maternity photos. And who appeared in these images alongside Robin? The student. True crime commentators and community members started asking questions. Why would a middle-aged woman take maternity photos with a teenage boy? The implications were obvious and people wanted answers. Detectives took note. These photos, combined with the suspicious circumstances surrounding the baby's birth, prompted further investigation. If the student was indeed the father, this wasn't just inappropriate, it was criminal. Detective Hinken moved forward with collecting evidence that would either confirm or dismiss the growing suspicions. DNA samples were needed. First, they obtained DNA from Robin. Standard procedure. Next, they collected DNA from the newborn baby. Then came the critical sample, DNA from the student himself. All three samples were sent to the Illinois State Police for analysis. The lab conducted what's called a parentage analysis, a scientific comparison that determines biological relationships with extraordinary accuracy. The results came back definitive. According to the analysis, Robin and the student were the biological parents of the baby. Not probable parents. Not possible parents. Confirmed parents. Let's pause and process what this means. DNA testing in these cases operates at accuracy levels that make false positives virtually impossible. The science doesn't leave room for interpretation. Either the genetic markers match or they don't. In this case, they matched. Now, work backward from the baby's January 2025 birth date. Assuming a typical pregnancy carried to full term, conception would have occurred around April 2024. April 2024. That's the exact time frame when the student first returned to Washington to visit Robin. This was months before he moved into her home in August. By the time the student moved in with Robin's family in August 2024, she would have been approximately 4 months pregnant, well into her second trimester. She would have known about the pregnancy. The physical changes would have been apparent. Yet the student still moved into her household. On February 6, 2025, Just weeks after Robin gave birth, the Washington Police Department received a report. Someone had reached out with concerns about Robin and her newborn baby. We don't know exactly who made that initial contact. Was it a concerned neighbor? A family member? Someone who saw those maternity photos online? The specific source hasn't been publicly disclosed. But that report set everything in motion. Detectives began investigating. They gathered evidence. They interviewed witnesses. And they built a case. The investigation didn't stop with DNA. Detectives obtained a search warrant for digital evidence, specifically targeting the Google accounts linked to the student's cell phone, which had been seized during the investigation. What they found was damning. According to court documents, investigators discovered a large number of images and videos of a sexual nature. These files depicted the student and Robin together. Among these materials were photographs showing the student engaged in sexual acts with Robin. Analysis of the photos revealed something else crucial. Based on angles and positioning, investigators determined that Robin herself had taken these photographs. She wasn't just a participant, she was documenting the abuse. But the digital evidence went further. According to news reports from Illinois outlets, Robin allegedly used burner phones, disposable phones designed to avoid detection. She also reportedly used fake names to maintain contact with the student. These aren't the actions of someone in a legitimate relationship. These are the calculated moves of someone trying to hide what they're doing. It wasn't until November 2025, nearly a year after the baby's birth, that criminal charges were formally filed against Robin. The charging documents, filed by the state's attorney of Tazewell County, Illinois, lay out multiple serious allegations. This charge covers the time period between March 1, 2024, and May 31, 2024. This window encompasses the likely conception date of the baby born in January 2025. The charge specifically notes that Robin was at least 17 years old and held a position of trust, authority, or supervision over the student, who was under the legal age of consent when the alleged acts occurred. Robin actually faces 2 separate counts of criminal sexual assault, covering different instances or time frames. These charges stem from the photographic evidence discovered during the investigation. The documents allege that between March 1, 2024 and February 25, 2025, Robin knowingly photographed the student engaged in sexual acts with her, despite knowing or reasonably being expected to know the student's age. When Robin was arrested, prosecutors appeared at her bond hearing with strong arguments about why she should remain in custody. Their primary concern? If released, they argued, Robin could not be trusted to stay away from the victim. Given the evidence of the ongoing relationship, the baby they share, and the documented pattern of behavior, prosecutors felt Robin posed a continued risk. But prosecutors raised another concern that caught many people's attention. They alleged that Robin's mother and sister had been enablers. According to the prosecution, these family members facilitated or at least turned a blind eye to what they called this inappropriate relationship. Think about what that means. If true, it suggests that other adults in Robin's life may have known what was happening and failed to intervene or report it. Based on these arguments, the judge ruled that Robin would be held without bond. She remains in custody awaiting trial. Let's talk about the defense side of this case, because it presents enormous challenges for Robin's legal team. The DNA evidence alone is incredibly difficult to challenge. Modern DNA analysis operates with accuracy rates that make it nearly impossible to dispute a match. Defense attorneys sometimes try to question chain of custody. Was the sample properly collected, stored, and tested? But attacking the actual science of a DNA match rarely succeeds. Then there's the photographic evidence. Images showing Robin and the student together in sexual situations, which investigators say Robin herself took, create a visual record that's hard to explain away. Could the defense argue that Robin was actually the victim? Theoretically, someone could claim she was assaulted by the student. But given the documented pattern of behavior, the fact that the student moved into her home, the maternity photos, and the evidence showing Robin took the explicit photographs, that argument seems unlikely to succeed. Another possible defense angle might be challenging whether Robin held a position of trust over the student, as the charges specify. However, once the student moved into her home and lived under her care, that argument becomes much harder to make. What does that leave? In cases where the evidence appears overwhelming, defense attorneys often shift their focus to negotiating a plea agreement rather than going to trial. The risks of trial, including potentially harsher sentences if convicted, make plea negotiations attractive. While the evidence appears strong, prosecutors face their own set of challenges, particularly when it comes to their key witness, the student himself. He's the victim in this case. He's the one who can testify about what happened, when it started, how it developed, and what Robin said and did. His testimony would be invaluable to the prosecution's case. But asking a teenager to testify in court about a sexual relationship with an adult, especially when that adult is the mother of his child, is enormously complicated. First, there's the emotional toll. Testifying means reliving traumatic experiences in a public courtroom, answering detailed questions, and potentially facing cross-examination from defense attorneys. Second, there's the complexity of the relationship itself. In cases like these, victims often don't initially see themselves as victims. They may believe they were in a genuine, loving relationship. They may feel protective of the person who abused them. They may even feel angry at law enforcement for intervening. This isn't unusual. It's actually a common pattern in cases involving adults in positions of authority who abuse minors. The manipulation runs so deep that the victim struggles to recognize the abuse for what it was. So what if the student takes the stand and says, "Yes, we had a relationship, but it was consensual. I loved her. I still do"? How does the prosecution handle that? The answer lies in expert testimony. Prosecutors can bring in psychologists or other experts who specialize in understanding abuse dynamics. These experts can explain to the jury that these feelings, the belief that the relationship was mutual and loving, are actually evidence of how successful the manipulation was. They can testify that it's completely normal for victims in these situations to defend their abusers, to minimize what happened, or even to claim they initiated the contact. This doesn't make the abuse any less real. It makes it more insidious. One of the most troubling aspects of this case is understanding how a middle school student ended up living with Robin in the first place. We don't know all the details about the student's family situation. Court documents don't provide that information, and for good reason. The student's privacy is protected. But clearly, something in his circumstances made it possible for him to move into Robin's home. Maybe there were custody issues. Maybe there was instability in his home life. Maybe his parents thought Robin's household would provide structure or support. Whatever the reason, it created an opportunity for abuse. People who work in child protection will tell you that predators often target vulnerable children. They look for kids who seem isolated, who have problems at home, who are struggling emotionally, or who lack strong parental supervision. It's not that these children are weak. It's that their circumstances make them more susceptible to manipulation. They're looking for connection, for attention, for someone who seems to understand them. And that's exactly what predators exploit. There's another victim in this case who hasn't been discussed much: Robin's daughter. Remember, this whole situation started at her middle school dance. She brought a date, this student, and her mother was there as a chaperone. What happened to that relationship between Robin's daughter and the student? When did it end? How did it end? And what must Robin's daughter be thinking now? Her mother is in jail, accused of having a sexual relationship with a boy her daughter knew, possibly dated. There's a baby, her half-brother, whose father is someone from her school. The emotional damage here extends far beyond just the student who was abused. Robin's daughter has to process the fact that her mother betrayed her in one of the most profound ways imaginable. Did Robin use her daughter to gain access to the student? Did she encourage her daughter to invite him over to spend time at their house? Did the daughter notice anything unusual as things developed? These questions don't have public answers yet, but they illustrate how abuse ripples outward, affecting not just the direct victim but everyone connected to the situation. In all of this, there's one person who had absolutely no choice in any of it: the baby boy born in January 2025. His mother is in jail facing serious criminal charges. His biological father is a teenager, legally still a child himself, certainly not in a position to provide care or custody. So where does this baby go? Who takes care of him? That's a heartbreaking question without an easy answer. Child Protective Services would typically become involved in a situation like this. Possible placements might include the student's parents or family members, Robin's extended family, though prosecutors allege some of them were enablers. Foster care: if no suitable family placement exists, every option presents challenges. If the baby goes to the student's family, they're caring for their grandson, but also a constant reminder of their son's abuse. If he goes to Robin's family, there are questions about whether those family members enabled the abuse in the first place. This child will grow up knowing the circumstances of his birth. He'll know his father was a victim of abuse by his mother. He'll know his existence is tied to a crime. That's a heavy burden for anyone to carry, much less a child who had no say in any of it. Robin is scheduled to appear in court on December 4th for her next hearing. What happens there depends on several factors. If defense attorneys are negotiating a plea deal, we might see movement in that direction. Plea agreements in cases like this typically involve the defendant pleading guilty to some or all charges in exchange for a specific sentence recommendation. The advantage for the prosecution is avoiding trial, which means the student doesn't have to testify. The advantage for the defense is potentially reducing the sentence or avoiding a trial with damaging evidence that could lead to even harsher punishment. If no plea agreement is reached, the case moves toward trial. That means jury selection, opening statements, witness testimony, and all the other elements of a criminal trial. Given the DNA evidence, the photographs, and the documentation, a trial would present significant risks for Robin. But defendants have the right to their day in court, and sometimes people choose to exercise that right even when the odds aren't in their favor. Beyond the criminal case, there's also the possibility of civil litigation. The student, as the victim, could potentially file a civil lawsuit against Robin seeking damages for the abuse he suffered. Civil cases operate under different standards than criminal cases and can result in financial judgments against the defendant. However, as experts point out, civil judgments are only valuable if the defendant has assets to pay them. Insurance doesn't cover intentional acts like sexual assault, so Robin would be personally liable for any judgment. If Robin doesn't have significant assets or income, a civil judgment might be symbolic rather than practical. But it can still serve a purpose, formally acknowledging the harm done and holding the perpetrator accountable in another venue. Cases like Robin's force us to confront uncomfortable truths about abuse, manipulation, and vulnerability. We want to believe that parents protect children. We want to trust that adults in positions of authority, coaches, teachers, neighbors, family, friends, will do the right thing. And the vast majority of people do. But predators exist. They're often skilled at appearing normal, trustworthy, even admirable. They volunteer at school functions. They open their homes to kids who need a place to stay. They present themselves as caring and supportive. And that's exactly what makes them dangerous. This case also highlights how difficult it can be for victims to recognize abuse when it's happening to them. When someone in authority gradually breaks down boundaries, when they make you feel special and chosen, when they frame inappropriate behavior as love, it's incredibly hard to see clearly. That's why age of consent laws exist. That's why we have specific charges for adults in positions of trust who abuse minors. Because the law recognizes that these relationships can never be truly consensual, no matter what the victim believes in the moment. In a place like Washington, Illinois, a smaller community where people know each other, a case like this sends shockwaves through the entire area. Parents question whether they can trust other parents. Kids wonder if adults they respected might not be who they seemed. Schools review their policies about volunteers and chaperones. There's also the whisper network. People who claim they knew something was off, who say they had suspicions but didn't want to get involved or didn't know what to do with their concerns. That's one of the most frustrating aspects of these cases. Often, in hindsight, there were warning signs. But people didn't speak up, either because they weren't sure or because they didn't want to create drama or because they couldn't imagine that someone they knew would do something so wrong. Robin Pston's case is extraordinary in its specifics. The school dance, the baby, the DNA evidence, the maternity photos. But it's also representative of a larger pattern of adults abusing positions of trust to exploit vulnerable young people. The evidence in this case appears strong. DNA doesn't lie. Photographs don't disappear. Digital records leave trails. What remains to be seen is how the legal process unfolds. Will there be a plea deal? Will the case go to trial? What sentence might Robin face if convicted? And beyond the legal questions, there are human questions. How is the student processing all of this? What support is he receiving? How is Robin's daughter coping? Who is caring for the baby? These aren't just legal proceedings. These are lives forever changed by choices one person made. As this case moves forward, it will continue to raise important discussions about how we protect children, how we identify predatory behavior, and how we support victims in recognizing abuse for what it truly is. Robin Pston returns to court on December 4th for her next appearance. We'll continue following this case as it develops through the legal system and bring you updates as they become available. This case reminds us why vigilance matters, why speaking up when something seems wrong is crucial, and why we must always prioritize the safety and well-being of young people over our comfort or convenience. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on this case and other important stories. Write your thoughts in the comment section below. We want to hear your perspective on how communities can better protect vulnerable youth and what warning signs people should watch for.